Occasionally, too, as headmaster, one would encounter moments of disarming, indeed, in some ways, rather courageous, because principled, honesty. One such occurred for me towards the end of my first year in post at Elstree. I've not mentioned it before, but I feel it's appropriate to do so now. The evening of the senior commendation, when hard-won academic and other prizes are distributed by the master of the company, had taken place. The prizes took the form of books, each marked by a book plate, identifying the reason for the award, and each signed by the headmaster. On this occasion, given the large number of prizes to be signed, and as it turned out, the shortage of time available, I resorted to using the very high quality signature stamp, which had been produced for me by my secretary. It really was of high quality. Once stamped with my signature, you would have had to have held up the book plate to the light at different angles, probably even undertaken the lightly lit finger test to guess whether or not the writing had flowed in ink from the tip of a pen or from the press of a stamp. Sometime after the prize giving that year, I received a delightfully courteous note from none other than Andrew Tarkey. The gist of his communication to me was roughly as follows. Dear Headmaster, courteous formality of the opening, forgive me for thus writing to you, and forgive me all the more if I am mistaken. Of course, he was absolutely sure he was not mistaken. But close scrutiny of your signature, which means having forensically subjected it to a battery of tests, in the handsome prize volume with which I was presented at senior commendation, suggests to me that the signature was, as one might say, stamped, and therefore mass-produced, rather than individually penned. Now, whilst the quality of the stamped signature is undoubtedly high, may I suggest that nothing quite matches the personal touch, which one might rather have hoped would have been applied in a circumstance such as this, and to a volume which in many instances, mine very much included, is destined to become a lifelong treasured possession. The letter then closed with elegance and the sincere expression of courtesy, as you would expect from Tarkey A, who was coming to the close of his year, as my first school captain. Of course, he was absolutely right. When I went to Shrewsbury, a signature stamp had been made for me, but apart from very occasional and absolutely routine stuff, I never used it. And each year, when I signed batches of book plates for hard-earned prizes, I remembered, yes, I think with a smile, and with admiration, and with no small touch of gratitude, such disarming and actually rather courageous honesty. Another trait, I believe, of Habs boys at their very best. During my time at Habs and since, I've always enjoyed getting into the classroom to teach, among other things, a bit of junior school Latin. There, with non-examined Latin, I could relax and relish the experience without my inevitable occasional absence being too damaging. And to my mind, it's a tragedy that the study of classics has pretty well disappeared from the national curriculum. Thankfully, it remains alive and well in Haberdashers schools. But looking back with much pleasure, over more than 3.5 decades of doing this, it's inevitable that one or two choice pupil offerings come to mind, and so, albeit as a digression before closing, yet to afford you a glimpse of the level of scholarship achieved even by some of my youngest and intellectually less attuned pupils, I have selected just 3. The first 2, and these are all quoted word for word, reflect in-depth study of the Roman invasion and occupation of Britain, and the third draws a little on the work of Homer. The occupation of Britain and the revolt of Boudica. I quote, "Boudica, was queen of the Iceni. Her husband was king, and quite friendly with the Romans. When he died, he had left his land and tribe to his wife and daughters. But the Romans did not respect his wishes. They destroyed his settlement. They raped his daughters. They raped his wife. Boudica was not happy. Another quotation. Before the Romans came to Britain, we were a savage and brutal pack of tribes. Many other countries did not know what wandered our land. They thought our people to be demons. But then the Romans came. They built roads. They organized our people. They protected us from the Welsh. And the Scottish. Overall, it was a huge success. Question: what were the reasons for the Trojan War, and how did Troy fall to the Greeks? And during the course of this rather charmingly tentative response, one examining wrote as follows: I'm not quite sure of my ground here, sir, and do correct me if I'm wrong. But I think I'm right in saying that a girl called Helen was involved somewhere along the line. John Carlton has eloquently spoken of the school's move to Elstree those years ago. It must have been a huge undertaking, and it was expertly carried through. One cannot but stand in awe of those who masterminded and managed the transition, most notably, of course, the headmaster, Dr. Taylor, Mrs. Taylor, Margaret. Perhaps most important of all, they, together with the governors of the time, ensured that, notwithstanding the relocation, the quality, the character, the strength of this very distinctive and successful school would be sustained into the future, as they most certainly have been. Some schools, of course, are a touch less fortunate in the awareness and the competence of their heads and governors. And my mind turns to the account of a school at which a new young religious studies teacher had just arrived. Aware of the need to set the pace early on and to encourage active participation in his lessons, he decided to begin with that famous story of Joshua and the fall of Jericho. He began with a question: who, speaking to the class, who, with a noise of trumpets and shouting, caused the walls of Jericho to come tumbling down? Well, the response was silence, which became a little awkward, until one boy at the back, let's call him Snipkins, put up his hand. I've no idea, sir, but it certainly wasn't me. Cheek, thought the teacher, who managed his way to the end of his first lesson, determined to seek out the headmaster thereafter, register his annoyance, and seek some support. And so he called the headmaster later in common room and explained how he'd gone into his very first religious studies class and, albeit rather nervous, had asked a question of the whole class, who, with the noise of trumpets and shouting, caused the walls of Jericho to come tumbling down, and he explained Snipkin's response. But to his surprise, to his considerable surprise, the headmaster's reaction wasn't quite as supportive as he might have expected. He thought for a moment. He said, look, I've known the Snipkins family for a long time now. They're a very nice family. And if Harry said he didn't do it, I, for one, could really have no reason to disbelieve. Well, thought the teacher, what astonishing ignorance. And he determined to have a quiet word with the chairman of governors when the right moment presented itself. And that moment did emerge over tea on speech day, when the chairman was making a point of meeting all new staff. And the young teacher took the chairman to one side and recounted his experience. The question about the fall of Jericho, the conversation with the headmaster, his astonishment at the inappropriateness and, to be frank, the ignorance of the headmaster's response. Well, the chairman of governors, as chairman of governors do, made sympathetic noises to quieten the frustrated young teacher, and then came up with a typically diplomatic suggestion. He said, look, this happened quite some time ago now. And in that sense, the heat of the moment has passed. So why not just discreetly have a word with the bursar, get an estimate for the cost of repairs, Let that be the end of the matter. Well, perhaps it's not for me to reflect upon the quality of headmasters at Haberdashers, but I can say, without hesitation and without equivocation, that the quality of governance of the school is unarguably high, and it has been for years. My own recollections of the wonderfully wise, thoughtful, helpful, ever available, genuinely interested guidance and support of, yes, if I may say, the late Sir Brian James, of Peter Bedford, of Mike Jeans, Anthony Miller, many others, remains for me a source of lasting pleasure and deep professional fulfillment. And of course, the fact that it and the other Haberdasher schools exist in the embrace of the company, whose clear-sighted interest in and commitment to school education at its very best continues undimmed, places them, those schools, in a most privileged and enviable position. And in addition, if I may say, I shall, the support of the Old Haberdashers Association, so evident in your presence here this evening, is of absolutely pivotal importance to the school now and into the future. At the beginning of this little offering, I mentioned the current educational muddle, as I called it, which through one politically motivated initiative after another from the Department of Education continues to disallow the possibility of clear, appropriate, well-directed, long-term national educational policy and practice to see daylight. How vital then that schools like ours, distinguished schools, historic schools, can rely upon those who have known it over their years, who have great fondness for it, who want to see it succeed in the future as ever before, who are seriously interested in it, and who can be the guardians and the expression of it at its best, thereby encouraging and enabling the school to adapt as seems most appropriate under successful headmasters from time to time, and to continue to go from strength to strength. The Haberdashers Ask School, boys and staff, is fortunate in itself, in its governance, and undoubtedly in the support of its association. The association of which it is my, or in respect of which, it's my pleasure now to invite you to rise, that I may propose a toast to the association, and that we may drink it together. The association.
Jeremy, thank you, I think, for that excellent speech. In my defence, I don't remember being quite so eloquent in that you made it sound like a poisoned pen letter. Although the sentiment was entirely accurate. Overall, you may have been a third choice, second toast, but that was a first-rate speech.